Welcome to this deep dive into a topic that has been making global headlines: the escalating tensions between India and Canada, which culminated in India downgrading its diplomatic ties with Canada. We will explore the historical context, including the roots of Indian immigration to Canada, the controversial support to Khalistani elements, the tragic Air India Flight 182 bombing, and the current political dynamics under Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that have strained relations between these two democracies. Let's begin with some history. Indian immigration to Canada dates back to the late 19th century. Many of the first Indian immigrants were ex-soldiers from the British Indian Army who had served the British Empire and were seeking better economic opportunities in the far-off land of Canada. However, the welcome they received was far from warm. These early immigrants faced institutional racism and systemic discrimination. They were seen as unwanted outsiders in a predominantly white Canada. In 1908, the Canadian government introduced restrictive immigration policies aimed at curbing Indian migration, most famously the Continuous Journey Regulation, which made it nearly impossible for Indians to enter Canada legally. This discrimination reached a tragic peak in 1914, with the infamous Kamagata Maru incident. A ship carrying Indian immigrants was denied entry into Canada and forcibly returned to India, where British forces shot and killed several passengers. This chapter of history marked the beginning of a long, fraught relationship between the Indian diaspora and the Canadian establishment. Fast forward to the 1980s, a dark period in India's history, with the rise of the Khalistan movement. This was a separatist movement that sought to create an independent Sikh homeland in the Indian state of Punjab. It was during this time that Canada became a significant base for Khalistani separatists, many of whom had emigrated from India or were second-generation immigrants. The movement gained traction among some in the Sikh diaspora, especially in Canada, which offered freedom of speech and assembly. While these are democratic rights that should be respected, the issue arose when these freedoms were used to support violent extremism and terrorism. Over the years, some elements within Canada have openly supported the Khalistan movement, with little to no repercussions from Canadian authorities. India, which had to combat a violent insurgency in Punjab that claimed thousands of lives, viewed this with growing concern. The situation became even more alarming with the involvement of Khalistani extremists in one of the most tragic terrorist attacks of the 20th century. On June 23, 1985, a tragedy unfolded in the skies over the Atlantic Ocean when Air India Flight 182, en route from Montreal to Mumbai, was bombed mid-air. The attack, orchestrated by Khalistani terrorists, claimed the lives of 329 innocent people, including 268 Canadian citizens. This was, and still remains, the deadliest terrorist attack in Canadian history. Yet, the investigation and handling of the case by Canadian authorities have been widely criticized. Many in India, as well as the families of the victims, accused the Canadian government of showing a lack of urgency and seriousness in bringing the perpetrators to justice. Only one person, Inderjit Singh Riyat, was convicted in connection with the bombing. The slow progress and perceived indifference toward the prosecution of those responsible created deep-seated anger and frustration within the Indian government and among the families of the victims. But the issue didn't end with the bombing. Decades later, the tensions continue to simmer, especially under the leadership of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Since taking office in 2015, Trudeau's government has been accused of turning a blind eye to the activities of Khalistani extremists on Canadian soil. Despite India's repeated concerns, pro-Khalistan rallies and anti-India protests have continued to take place in Canada. Trudeau's government has been criticized for its reluctance to crack down on Khalistani elements within the Sikh diaspora. His administration's actions have often been viewed as an attempt to secure the political support of Khalistani sympathizers, who hold significant influence in certain parts of Canada, particularly in the province of British Columbia. But it's not just political rhetoric that's concerning, it's the actions of extremist elements that are alarming. In recent years, India's diplomatic missions and consulates in Canada have been repeatedly targeted by Khalistani activists. In some instances, these extremists have vandalized Indian embassies and staged violent protests outside Indian consulates. The Indian government has expressed its frustration with what it perceives as a lack of adequate protection for its diplomatic staff. There have also been serious concerns about threats to the lives of Indian diplomats stationed in Canada. The growing hostility has led to heightened security measures and escalating tensions between the two nations. In June 2023, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani separatist leader and a wanted terrorist in India, was killed in Canada. In September 2023, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a shocking allegation, claiming that India might have been involved in Nijjar's assassination. This accusation sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community, leading to an unprecedented deterioration in India-Canada relations. India, in turn, strongly denied any involvement and demanded proof from the Canadian government. To date, no concrete evidence has been provided to substantiate Trudeau's claims, leading many to question the validity of his accusation. India has called these allegations baseless, with some analysts speculating that Trudeau might be using the issue to shore up political support from pro-Khalistan elements, especially as he leads a minority government that has been struggling to maintain its footing. Adding fuel to the fire was a disturbing call from Gurpatwant Singh Pannan, a leader of the banned terrorist organization Sikhs for Justice, SFJ. In September 2023, Pannan publicly called on Indo-Canadian Hindus to leave Canada, raising alarms about possible violence against the community. He even went as far as threatening to repeat the Air India Flight 182 bombing, a chilling reminder of the terrorist acts committed decades earlier. Meanwhile, Hindu temples in Canada have increasingly been targeted by Khalistani extremists. Several temples have been vandalized with pro-Khalistan slogans, and the Indian community in Canada has expressed growing fears about their safety. These attacks on cultural and religious symbols have only deepened the rift between the Indian diaspora and the Canadian government. After Trudeau's explosive allegations and the continued threats posed by Khalistani extremists, India decided to take a drastic step. In October 2023, India officially downgraded its diplomatic ties with Canada. This move marked a significant turning point in bilateral relations, signaling that India would no longer tolerate what it sees as Canada's tacit support for anti-India elements. India recalled its High Commissioner from Canada and issued a strong statement, criticizing the Trudeau government for its inaction on the Khalistan issue and for making unfounded accusations. Many observers believe that Trudeau's accusations against India are politically motivated. He leads a minority government and has faced internal pressure from various factions, including those sympathetic to the Khalistani cause. Some analysts argue that Trudeau is using the India issue to gain support from these groups, as well as to distract from domestic issues such as economic challenges and waning popularity. However, this strategy may have backfired, as Trudeau's handling of the Nijjar case has not only damaged Canada's relationship with India but also raised questions about his government's credibility on the global stage. In conclusion, the current state of India-Canada relations is deeply rooted in history, from early Indian immigration and racial discrimination to the rise of the Khalistan movement and the tragic bombing of Air India Flight 182. Under Justin Trudeau's leadership, Canada's handling of the Khalistan issue has only exacerbated tensions, leading to a significant diplomatic fallout. With India downgrading its ties, the future of India-Canada relations looks uncertain. Whether these two nations can bridge this growing divide will depend on how both sides address the complex and sensitive issues at play. Until then, the world will be watching closely.